shoulders. We're conscious of it.
I know this is like fun.
I'm gonna sit there.
I'd like to call the planning commission meeting to order.
Thank you.
June 27th, 2022 planning commission. And we'll start with a roll call. Cynthia, you want to start? Just announce your presence.
Cynthia Batty is here.
Tamara Stoner here.
Matthew Lovely here.
Gail Sykes.
Kristen Zumar here.
George Velasquez.
And we also have Chris Rogers with us from AECom this evening. I'd like to welcome Tamara to the planning commission. This is her first meeting. I know you live in Boothurst and you work at Delaware State University.
I do.
Would you like to share anything else about you or your?
Sure. So I've been at Delaware State University since 2018. I came from the law firm setting, doing corporate bankruptcies. I worked for different law firms throughout the city, like Drinker Biddle, Bayard, Richards, Layton and Finger, White and Williams. I did go to, again, Delaware State University in 2018 as a paralegal / board secretary, then became chief of staff to the former president, Dr. Mashu. Now I'm currently assistant vice president of enterprise risk management, insurance and Title IX, and still continuing my work as university secretary for the board of trustees. Where I am today.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, minutes. As always, Kathy did a great job of capturing the discussion from last meeting. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, a motion
I'm
to
motion.
approve?
I motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I'm abstain.
All right.
Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Not that I didn't think they were good.
And just a brief summary of last minute or our last meeting, which was covered in the minutes for 130 and 150 Lutkins Drive. We spent most of the time on that and had a presentation by Sean Tucker, attorney for the development group, plus several members of the development team. And I see many of them in the audience this evening. We also, well, we've all received copies of the concept plan and we reviewed that with the development team and got a chance to have some discussion and get some questions answered. So on our agenda tonight, 2 days after our planning commission meeting, the project was presented to PLUS, which is part of state planning, preliminary land use services. And they provide the service of bringing together the multiple state agencies to give comments on projects. And we just received the PLUS comments on Friday. And so hopefully we've at least had a chance to look at them. And we thought we would start with a discussion tonight of the recommendations and any comments we had, any questions on some of the recommendations. And Chris is here to, I don't know if you want to guide us through it, Chris, or if you want me to do that and you chime in, or what would you prefer?
I can go over them in general.
All right.
Having just received them on Friday, we haven't had a chance to go through them, you know, in any detail. You know, I don't want to risk minimizing any particular comment or agency by just trying to highlight, what I think are the important comments or the highlights of the comments. But it was a very thorough review. Comments came out Friday. We will use these comments as the beginning of formulating our staff report to you as the Planning Commission. Just taking a step back to remind everybody of the process and your role and what the applicant is requesting is the applicant is requesting an amendment to the comprehensive plan to change the suggested land use from industrial office park to residential and commercial, simultaneously requesting a rezoning from industrial park zoning to R3 residential and a general commercial zoning. The geographies of those two proposed zoning districts are illustrated on the concept plan. Your role in the request to amend the comprehensive plan and to rezone the property is to make a recommendation to City Council. The zoning ordinance sets time limits by which the Planning Commission must make that recommendation. The applicant has gracefully waived the time limit requirement that the Planning Commission has to make that recommendation. So there's those sort of high-level land use changes that are required, and your role in making a recommendation to the City Council on those two items, comprehensive plan and the rezoning. At the same time, the applicant will eventually need site plan approval. And I haven't firmed up exactly how that process will fit in with the comprehensive plan and rezoning process yet with the city attorney. Also part of the land use process that the applicant wants to utilize is within the city zoning ordinance. There is a provision called planned development that allows the Planning Commission to modify certain requirements in the R3.
That's correct.
Zone to setbacks and building heights to the extent that the Planning Commission feels that said modification makes the plan a better plan in light of the intent of the comprehensive plan. Also, the applicant is requesting residential uses above the commercial uses in what would be zoned general commercial, and that requires a special exception by the Board of Adjustment. Your role on special exceptions is also to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. How all of that comes together in a coherent land development consideration process, I don't have the answer right now. I haven't sat down with the city attorney at any length or with the applicant to sort of set the path forward. My inclination would hopefully be to try to determine the overall merits of the comprehensive plan amendment process without getting into the details of a lot of engineering and expense on behalf of the applicant prior to considering the comprehensive plan and even the rezoning. So if the comp plan is amended and it is rezoned, they will have to do a full-blown site plan and subdivision in accordance with the city subdivision regulations. And how that, again, meshes with the comp plan and rezoning process and special exception process, we don't have the details laid out yet. The first step was to be introduced to the Planning Commission, which was done last month. It was sent off to Plus. We have those comments as of Friday.
Could you go over the R3 zone provision for that you were referring to?
Yes. It's section 230-39 of the city zoning ordinance. Just highlight some of the key points. It states within any residence district or combination of residence districts in the case of land capable of subdivision under the applicable district regulations, the planning commission may authorize deviation from the district regulations relating to lot size, lot area per family, lot width, lot depth, front, rear, and side yard requirements, and may allow any one or combination of the types of residential structures permitted by this chapter within the city, provided all of the requirements contained in subsection B and C are fulfilled. So I think that we said R3 just because the applicant is requesting R3, but it sounds like those provisions would be permitted under any residential zoning district. So we have a comprehensive plan amendment, a rezoning. We would have a site plan that would seek to utilize that section of the zoning ordinance. The residential uses over the commercial uses in the area to be zoned general commercial would require a special exception. So you have multiple roles in this land development process. Ones are to make a recommendation to the city council. One is to make a recommendation to the board of adjustment. And one role is more or less the approval authority over the site plan and subdivision to the extent it moves forward, with the final action being taken by city council on those items as well, but more as a affirmation of your approval and not as a true review.
All right, well, I mean, I did go through the plus comments and I do have some questions and hopefully somebody else, other people or comments. So I wanted some more information on investment levels 1 and 2. The very beginning of the document talks about the projects located in investment levels 1 and 2 of the 2020 strategies for state policies and spending, which sounds like they're areas for designated for future redevelopment. And I just don't have a picture of, is it like the big area? Is it the industrial park? Is it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a map, but the intent is that I don't know when the law was initially passed. Sean probably does. It was the way for the state to prioritize its spending to incentivize state spending in areas that they thought reasonable for growth and redevelopment. They didn't want to spend a lot of capital investments in areas that were low density or sensitive areas. So there is a map that designates level 1 and level 2 spending areas, and any urban environment between Wilmington and Newark more or less is in a level 1 or level 2 areas, and they get down into the micro level where they have out of play areas that they know are sensitive areas or conserved lands, or have some legal constraints where they state that they will not spend state monies there. It's not the state, it's the state's way of having input on land use authority. They don't have land use authority. We have land use authority, but they have a say over where they're going to spend the dollars. And that's their way of incentivizing investment of state dollars in the areas that they find suitable for growth.
All right. Would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, Chairwoman, thank you. Sean Tucker for the record. And we did receive the plus comments on Friday as well. We have not had a chance to fully absorb them. There's a lot there. But we have taken a preliminary look, and we've had brief discussions with both our engineer and planner. Regarding the question, Chairperson, regarding the state strategies map, Mr. Rogers, I think, did a nice summary of the purpose. There is a published state strategies map, levels, I think it's 1 through 4, with this out of play area that Mr. Rogers also mentioned. Our proposed development is in 1 and 2, which are the areas designated by the state for infrastructure investment, which is where they generally encourage redevelopment. The out of play area that does bleed onto our site, we are not proposing to develop in that area. So our site area that we propose for development is limited to 1 and 2, I believe, entirely. There could be a little bit of 3 there, but I don't think so. It's predominantly 1 and 2, if not all 1 and 2, where we seek to build. The rest, particularly the out of play, is certainly not going to be developed. And we were careful about that. We took the state strategies map in mind, of course, in preparing this concept plan for all of you. And it is incorporated by reference in your comp plan, the state strategies map. And the idea certainly, as Mr. Rogers outlined, is for local government and the state to coordinate infrastructure to support responsible growth and well-planned growth. So we are in front of you with a concept plan that is following the intent, certainly, of the state strategies and investment map.
But the area is a good part of Wilmington to Newark.
You see it, it's the red area in particular.
Uh-huh.
And you see it mostly in municipal boundaries, because that is where the state has always wanted growth to be focused, quite frankly. If you look back in the history, there's always been this underlying policy the state has had, at least since the Quality of Life Act in 1986, to encourage development in municipalities and not in the suburbs. So you see the red predominantly in the municipalities, as well as I think it's the orange that is the level 2
That's correct.
in the map.
All right, but it can be any kind of infrastructure.
Yes, but they're generally the state tries to coordinate both traffic improvements. They like to see sewer improvements. Sometimes that's the city, sometimes it's the county. I think you have an MOU with the county, but they also support money spent on sewer, for example, that benefit municipalities such as Newcastle City. So it's one of the boxes we always check as land use attorneys. We don't want to come to you in a level 3 or level 4 area project. We would sooner go to the state and try to seek some revision to the map if appropriate. But that is one of the first boxes we want to check before we bring a proposal before you or any other zoning authority.
I don't want to dominate, but I had another question.
Certainly.
Under the Department of Transportation, and there were actually some counts, some high-level counts that were referenced. 2,000 vehicle trips and over 200 for peak hours. And then there was a sentence I was confused about. The applications proposed entrances, they're not on a state maintained road. And I wasn't sure if that was referencing Lincoln's Drive or if it was the entrances to the proposed community.
That's a great question. And I read it to mean the attention to or the access onto Lukens. And apparently what DelDOT is saying is that because Lukens is a city road, that they do not have direct jurisdiction over. And I was surprised because I thought they would require a traffic study, but since it's not a state road, they seem to be taking the position that they lack authority to require a traffic study. We did check your code to see if one is required, and I've not had a chance to speak to the city solicitor yet. I don't believe one is required, but I would like to talk to your city solicitor about that. Having said that, we're going to do one. I mean, we've already talked about that. We know traffic is a concern. We've heard that from some of you. We've heard that from some of the residents that came and spoke. Nicole Klein is our traffic engineer. She's to my left. She's here with us tonight, and she is with McMahon and Associates. And she does a lot of work in this jurisdiction, does a really good job. I've worked with her on several projects. She's very thorough. And we've already talked to our client about this. We're going to set up parameters, and we're happy to work with the city in doing so to perform a traffic study similar to what DelDOT would require. So we want to mirror those parameters and prepare that for you and the rest of city council so that you have some benchmark to look at when considering our traffic impact.
I think that's very important because
Agreed.
that is a concern.
We heard that at the last meeting.
Yep.
Of
Agreed.
the planning commission as well as the public, the residents.
Yeah, and like Sean mentioned, if this were on a state road, DelDOT would require a TIS. So given the conditions, but given the level of development, we understand that. And traffic is always an item that, not only will come up at, this level and at the city council level, but the public will have questions, and we want to be able to answer those questions. So.
And do you have an idea of timing for that study?
If we consult with your planner and your city solicitor, we could get started right away. Keep in mind, we are at concept level, and in your code, that predates the site plan. So at concept, we're really at the front door of this process with all of you. We would anticipate submitting a site plan in the near future, where we could dig in more to, well, when do we go to the Board of Adjustment? When do we need a recommendation or ask for a recommendation from you regarding the planned development option, which, by the way, we're only seeking some adjustments for parking, not for other things currently, but we thought maybe if some of you had different ideas on lot placement, that option would give everybody flexibility through the review process. So we're ready to start. We have Nicole here for that purpose in part. So we're going to jump on that between now and the next meeting.
Can I ask a question?
So certainly.
What roadways in particular are you gonna do the traffic study?
We literally got the letter Friday. We've only talked preliminarily about it, but certainly we would be studying the light out at Route 9 and coming out of, Lucan as you go around the bend and come up to the bridge and the ramps. But I would suspect that we will be fanning out from there. There is a model that DelDOT uses that Nicole is familiar with, where they determine based on trip generation, how many intersections we go out in which directions. So we're going to mimic that. We just haven't done it yet, but we're going to get started on it now that we're at this point. And we got that letter from the state. We anticipated, honestly, that the state was going to say, we're going to schedule a scoping meeting, and then we would sit down with them and do it. And now that we have their comment, we realize we'll be doing that ourselves, or perhaps in concert with Mr. Rogers and other folks with the city. But we'd like to use their model because that has become the standard in the state of Delaware. And there's consistency and predictability with that. It is mathematical, so it's not perfect, but it's what, for the 20 years I've been doing this, people use when they do traffic analysis. So we will have an update for you on that probably at the next
I was
meeting.
just interested because there's not probably as much traffic up Lucan's Drive as there would be when development comes up. So I was just wondering how you estimate.
Oh, that's a
that
great,
and-
a great question. And I'll give a short answer and then let Nicole give you a more detailed answer so I don't get into trouble. But essentially, we have to take into account our project, certainly, as well as other committed development in the area. So if there is a project pending in your process, where there is a plan that's been approved and unbuilt, we have to plug those trips into the model as if they exist today, even though they may not. And then, of course, we do traffic counts to see what traffic is there today. We add existing traffic with projected traffic and come out with various level of services or delays at the intersection. And there's standards set by DelDOT. For example, you have to be a level service D or better to pass. And DelDOT does make certain exceptions to that, but that essentially means that during the peak hour of traffic, you don't have a delay at any given intersection within your scope of more than 55 seconds over the 2-hour peak. And typically there's an AM and PM. So I probably said more than I should. Did I get that right?
He did a good job.
Okay, all right.
And the one question that typically comes up is, okay, you have to project traffic into the future. Where do those numbers come from? Well, we have industry standard data based on the land use, single family homes, townhomes, apartments, all broken down to very specific land uses that give us trip generation rates. So once we know the number of units, the type of units, for anything that's commercial, the type of use and the square footage, we are able to use those trip generation rates to establish, the number of trips anticipated to be generated by this type of development. And like Sean said, any of those other committed developments that aren't constructed yet, then we can take the existing count data we collect in the field, add on that projected traffic, and we know how our intersections are going to operate in the future. And so we take a look at each of those steps so that we can not only show what, the intersections look like in terms of operations at the end, but, all the pieces in between of how we got there. So that's essentially what will go into the traffic study. And in terms of the scope, DelDOT has a prescribed process, as Sean said. It's based on a model and number of trips through a given intersection to be added by a particular development. And you can imagine as you get further and further out, those new trips start to drop off. So DelDOT's model basically, factors in that once you get to a certain point and you're only talking about a couple of additional trips at an intersection, there's really no impact from that. So, that's where we'll look at the actual study area and we'll base it on the number of trips and what directions they're anticipated to go in. And that's where, we can work with the city's engineer to confirm that we've got the right scope of study, but that's how we'll establish it. Mhm.
I just see that traffic with one road, one way in and one way out, and this type of development with adding this many people will be part of our decision making, whether it's a comp plan change from the industrial office part to a.
We certainly understand that traffic is important, Chairperson, and to the public. I would, though, ask folks to keep in mind, and I think we'll probably provide a comparison just for a measuring stick, that the current zoning would permit a logistics park.
Right.
With tractor trailers, and that's going to generate by right a certain number of trips. And so we just want to give you some context with, and we don't know what the answer is going to be till we run the modeling, but Nicole would probably run it both ways just to give you a sense of that. Because the current zoning would allow that without a traffic study, we now know, because DelDOT lacks jurisdiction over the road.
Very true. It's not going to remain open space.
Yes, that's correct.
And the type of vehicles is important too, not just the number of trips, but you talk about a logistics park, you talk about some type of distribution center, that could be a lot of truck traffic. And a high number of passenger vehicles at shift change times. While those may occur at different peaks, it still can be a significant increase in a short period of time. So being able to provide some comparison of those types of statistics from a traffic standpoint, we understand will be important.
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Is the portion of Lincoln's Drive in front of the development dedicated? I noticed it doesn't have a top coat. It's not dedicated.
That's correct.
And what's the section? What's the, a lot?
Well, it's a lot. Yeah, it's pretty big.
We could get that.
And candidly, I mean, to be honest with you, we probably won't do it until after this is done anyway.
So from the railroad tracks
All the
into
way
the
to the
site
end.
is not yet dedicated to the
That's
city.
correct.
You'll notice there's a change in the roadway after the, around here. The road is newer and it doesn't have, but it doesn't have a top coat. There's about 1.5 inches to 2 inches revealing on the curve. So it tells you that the top coat hasn't been placed yet. So that's a good thing. Typically when a jurisdiction takes dedication of the road, we prevent top coating from occurring until the latter stages of the development, because you don't want to take dedication of a road while construction is occurring. So we would usually recommend 80% build out before we would, allow a top coat. So that's a good thing. And the section between the railroad tracks and Cherry Lane, how old is that?
So I forgot to state Mario Gangemi.
Yes, sorry.
And it's okay. That actually is the DelDOT jurisdiction. Because it's in the county.
Okay.
So I don't know how old it is, but it's theoretically it's DelDOT jurisdiction.
Without, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Nicole, but one, I don't know if it's a concern because we're not there yet, but the road's obviously designed for industrial office park.
Mhm.
And I guess as we move forward, we're going to be looking at ways of how the capacity is not going to be an issue unless we find something at the intersection. Traffic studies typically mostly look at the intersection capacities. And they don't look at the roadway segments. But here, normally we're dealing with narrow roadway segments and people are concerned about there's too many cars for this county road. Here we do have the opposite situation where the roads are extremely wide for a residential situation. And I guess moving forward, we're going to be looking at ways to calm stripe, asking you how are we going to avoid the conflicts between the industrial office park uses and the warehouse uses and the typical everyday residential use. Because it is a wide road that lends itself to speeding. Warehousing, it's not striped now. It probably will want to be striped in the future. That's obviously not a big deal, but I'm just getting to the point of the nature of that roadway is going to change, not so much physically, but from its use, and it has to be addressed somehow. And now that there's going to be 2,000 trips at the end of it. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think the technicalities of a traffic impact study will get to the heart of that issue, but it's something that we want to address moving forward.
We could certainly include that.
Yeah.
And I anticipated that given the width of the road. I mean, we don't have the opposite problem, which is good, which is it's too narrow. Being too wide can be managed and probably a good thing, whether it be with islands or striping, but we would intend to include that, Mr. Rogers.
But at the risk of not impacting
Yep.
Up until now, use of that roadway, which
Yep.
is industrial office park. Trucks and employees.
And that'll benefit, that'll benefit the school actually.
The school.
And while a traffic impact study, if you look at DelDOT's regulations, it doesn't really cover those types of issues. It certainly will provide the background data to look at those things, the traffic breakdown existing versus what's proposed and the different mix. Will give us a lot of insight into, weighing in on those types of things for city review.
Cynthia.
Oh, I had a question about flood zone, flood hazard area section. What jumped out at me as a now 7-year resident of this town and being very grateful I don't live on the Strand. Homeowners with mortgages may be required to purchase flood insurance. I just wondered what that did to your thinking about the whole thing, because what and maybe this isn't even relevant for planning commission, I don't know, but what I've been hearing about flood insurance is going to get more and more expensive, and rises in rivers and oceans is happening faster than anticipated. So I just wondered what that was doing to your thinking.
Well, let me, if I may, comment. I think it is appropriate, certainly in front of the planning commission. I think it's certainly a good question. I'll let Tom dig into maybe what he's looked at so far in terms of the flood map, but certainly we're going to stay out of the floodplain. And we don't anticipate at this time adding any material to the floodplain. So we see a net zero increase in terms of fill right now, based on our current initial look, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, but anything's changed since we last spoke. So that if it goes as planned, we'll know more as we advance with all of you through the process. But right now, we do not anticipate increasing the floodplain in terms of any height, so that would not affect any folks who live on the Strand or otherwise right now, or other neighboring properties. Secondly, there are floodproofing steps you can take. And we're also considering perhaps building a little bit higher than the code would require.
That's
So
kind
that
of where I was
prophylactically,
going.
yeah.
I didn't mean to imply, by the way, that this would have any impact on the Strand. It's just that every time I walk down there, I think I'm glad I'm 2 feet higher. That's all.
Understood. It's, NOAA has an interesting page on their website that talks about anticipated flood level increase over the next, I think it's 30 years. For the East Coast generally, I think I saw 8 inches the last time I checked. But that's NOAA, and that's just one source. That if you're curious about that, there are some projections on that website.
I think I saw numbers in here around that.
Was
Yes,
that in
there are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, yes, I mean, thank you for bringing that up, because I had those concerns as well. Say by 2015, so by 2050.
Oh, here it is, yes.
Sea level was projected 0.7 to 1.9.
Yeah, page 11, yes.
And by the end of the century, projections 1.7 to 5 feet. So there's actually a recommendation to in areas within 5 feet of the mean sea level, avoid construction of permanent structures and infrastructure. So, and I think I expressed this concern last meeting because I do live on the Strand.
Sorry.
I see by the concept plan that you're not building in the 100-year floodplain, but you do have plans right up next to it. And I can't tell elevations, but it sounds like the recommendations are to build to a higher level, looking forward to 2050, hoping these structures, if approved, would still be around at the end of the century. And so would there be consideration to making some adjustments?
There certainly would, Chairperson. I think, I just asked the board, keep in mind that there's a section of the report that is the law that's adopted by the General Assembly, which we're certainly obligated to follow. And there are certainly the city's laws that we are obligated to follow. And then we have folks in some state agencies who make these recommendations that are welcome. I mean, I used to work very closely with Connie Holland on them when she was head of Plus. I haven't gotten to know the new director quite as well yet, but 100 years out, that's one of the tallest orders I've ever seen in a Plus report, quite frankly. The comments by DEMA as well, I was a little bit stunned by. So what I can say certainly is if it's required by law, we're absolutely going to do it, certainly. And that's the standard that we typically follow, either your code or state code. On the recommendations, we try to find a way to compromise on those and work with you and other members of the commission and certainly city council. I don't know that 5 feet, 100 years out is something that realistically can be accurately estimated. But we
No,
will certainly-
I mean, that's
the number.
highest part of the
Yeah,
range,
yeah.
1.7 to 5 feet.
But we're happy to work and see what does work from a height standpoint, how far we can come and get close to that without sort of pouring over the top of the dam. No pun intended. I mean, you saw with DEMA, and it stuck out to me, where they were recommending no development on properties adjacent to the floodplain, which I've never seen before. And I will share, I already contacted DEMA Friday afternoon when I saw that, because I've never seen anything like that. And then I actually spoke with the head of Plus this morning, who sent an email already confirming to me that is going to be removed. Okay, that is not a law. It could be a recommendation, I guess. I think it's a pretty high recommendation, but Plus did, confirm that that's going to be removed from the section marked permitting requirement, because it's simply not. I mean, it would be hundreds of millions of dollars for the state of Delaware to buy up land adjacent to floodplains. And if the state wants to do that, they certainly can, but that would be a complete taking of property. And we're still looking through it for other instances like that. So some of the recommendations have bled into the permitting requirements. I think, just a little bit of an oversight, and I think you're going to see an amended letter probably come out in a week or so, just correcting the DEMA issue in particular, and maybe one or two others. But again, we are here to work with the city and residents and compromise on things that are recommendations. If it's by code, it's by code, and we're going to follow. But that's typically where we end up is by code with some adjustments if folks feel strongly about it in other sensitive areas.
I would like to add, Madam Chair, Mr. Tucker's right about the code. However, they are requesting a discretionary action on behalf of the city council. So I would, without our council here, I would recommend that, within reason, you have the ability to recommend more restrictive items than are required by code, given the discretionary nature and given your role in this process, specifically related to the comp plan as a recommendation role. And I think the city council also has same discretionary authority that they can set conditions on the rezoning and the site plan to the extent that those two are tied together. So I think everybody wants to be within reason if the project has merit, but I don't think we're limited strictly by code here.
Well, as you indicated, Mr. Rogers, I don't want to speak for the solicitor. There are some contract zoning notions we have to be careful of. Voluntarily agreeing to exceed code is one thing, but it's certainly something we could talk through. As I indicated, if there are sensitive areas, we certainly want to work with you and the city on those, but there are some guardrails that we have to honor on both sides if we go too far. And I'll certainly talk to Mr. Lasko and share anything that he and I speak with all of you. We just, again, kind of seeing this letter and some of these things for the first time, and I've not seen some of these types of comments before. And they go a little bit further than what I'm used to seeing, quite frankly.
But you may be willing to consider.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Additional freeboard or movement of some of the structures.
And I have clients that often agree to that voluntarily as part of the approval process. And so I would anticipate some of that here certainly as well. I can't promise 5 feet above floodplain based on a 100-year model.
Right,
That
I did see that.
It's actually the recommendation in the letter. It's not floodplain. It's actually mean sea level. Those are actually different things. Actually, I'm sorry, Seth Shapiro on the land corner. I'm actually not sure do you know what the specific definition difference is between those?
It's not floodplain.
It's not.
It varies based on the data gates that are set up by the Coast Guard along there. We can get that number, but it basically varies if it's a high gate set up in those two levels. We've actually and we've delineated all of its columns, kind of CDA engineering. We've delineated the various flood zones that are referenced, and we have the limits of wave action zone, the 100-year floodplain. And we also have the mean high tide and high tide delineated. And we're the floodplain is higher than I don't know what that translates to. We could calculate that.
Right,
It's not an exact number because it varies.
Regular sea level, mean sea level, the floodplain, and then we're above that.
And right now, we made it a point to hardwire and locate all the structures outside the floodplain. So by the way, because the floodplain is defined by the topographic, it varies from 8 to 10 feet across here. It's variable all along the coastline. But by horizontal, it's basically keeping it out of the floodplain, and by default, keeping it above the floodplain, just with the natural topography, because the floodplain is representative of actual elevation. So we're going to raise our buildings above the floodplain by the fact that they're outside of it, but then we're going to raise it even more so together.
we'll be at a point if we had a chance to absorb it all, because truly we saw it Friday and had a little bit of time to talk about it before today's meeting. We'll be able to show you on the design, ultimately with Colin's help, where these lines fall in terms of our proposed construction.
That would be very helpful.
Can I ask something else? Not quite with the floodplain, but with like stormwater management. I know other areas of the city have a lot of issues with like water pooling with storms and stuff. Do you guys have things that are gonna address that? Or, because I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I apologize.
No, and that didn't actually, I don't think that really came up at the last meeting, because we're so early in the process, but we are required, and Colin will be doing a drainage design to match pre and post development runoff. What I like to recommend to clients is if there's a specific problem in the area that we can improve by some design on our site, we will try to do that if it's not too expensive, to make things a little better if we can, but we certainly won't make it worse.
Well, the good news is whatever problem there is already ours.
Yeah.
Madam Chairman, can I say something else? In regards to gender compliance, a couple of years back, the city council wanted to put bump out structures into the courthouse square, which were supposed to contain stormwater runoff things. I am not an expert, but I'm the one who wrote the paper that said, don't do it. So, and one of the reasons not to do that, well, there were two. One was that we were already in compliance with the street sweeping and everything was good. The other was that the structures required maintenance that no one had anticipated the cost of. And in projects like I'm hearing here, I'm sorry, I missed the last meeting, Tony, I deeply apologize. Sometimes building stuff like that leaves a legacy for people later that they suddenly have to contend with. So I would just say, whatever your plan is, make sure it doesn't do that. I was a condo owner for 22 years and I probably would have killed the people who built the building. So if I had had a chance, but just saying that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and building structures obligates people to maintain things. And I think that when the city council had anticipated that project, they didn't anticipate the millions of dollars it would have cost to maintain it. So that's my only thought there.
Thank you. Agreed, by the way.
And we have a much more consolidated stormwater approach. We don't have a lot of little urban planners that require lots of weeding and refreshing of the soil for every little drainage area. And have on the side, 20 or 30 small, not very efficient. What we did is we lined them conceptually at the low end of the site, such that they can have a lower the grading, you get that whole fill and floodplain, and that fill to keep it as low as possible, and get that below zero. We're supposed to get there. So we basically strategically line them on the low end, have them in areas that we make sure they have positive outfall already. So we want to make sure that they're really workable, feasible. We sized them more advanced than we normally do a conceptual to make sure we had a clean, simple but effective approach and strategically located in the area that the stormwater wants to go, versus forcing those, like we said, those little areas that are all interspersed throughout.
Yeah, that was really problematic. Yes, thank you.
Another question, Madam Chair. Told you I would get into detail.
That's okay. It's over here.
What do you anticipate being dedicated internally as far as roadways?
Have we gotten that far, Mary?
We haven't. Thinking out loud, which I know is always dangerous. I think at a minimum, it's probably the single family aspect.
This road?
Yes, sir.
Before you, I'm not trying to trap you, but one concern in the back of my mind as a planner is the gated community concept. And some people think that's a good thing. Some people that think that's a bad thing. It has its pros and cons. The pros are that the jurisdictions don't have to maintain the internal roads. And the community can keep others out. But the downside is the community can keep people out, and they tend to become their own little fiefdoms of a power base and a demographic, and and in a small urban setting, that's a concern that I have, is that this is an isolated community with no physical ties to the downtown, and city council is going to have concerns about taking on responsibility for the internal infrastructure, there's no doubt, but at the same time, that if that doesn't happen, that comes at the cost of further isolating the community as a gated standalone community with its own needs and its own
Voting block.
I'm not sure there's a mutual exclusivity that I'm not sure that I agree with. I mean, it's not intended to be a gated community, which doesn't necessarily mean that the roads inside are public. They could still be privately maintained and completely open, but it just doesn't mean that they're dedicated.
I use the terms gated loosely. You're right. I don't mean physically blocked off, but we happen to have that example here in the city now, and it's, it's not that, didn't turn out that nice so far.
It's certainly something that if the planning commission had a strong preference, we're certainly all ears. We've not submitted the site plan yet. We still are concepts. So these types of comments and input are challenging us to think a little bit too. So we appreciate that.
Actually, I want to point out one thing, actually, because it's one of the things in the feedback that we received at the last meeting that we did change a little bit, which goes to this idea of public versus private streets, is that this sort of the centerpiece of the development, we've actually changed this a little bit. We got a comment, which I didn't think was necessarily accurate, that it was just like a parking lot. Well, we've actually done some work on that and changing that paving pattern in there so that while it's not just like the same asphalt as the internal streets and the parking areas, but it's either stamped concrete or some other kind of special paving in there. That'd be great for placemaking and really trying to create it as a unique place. But to dedicate that back.
City's not going to want to maintain
You don't
that.
want that, right? So, so the flexibility of keeping it within some kind of maintenance agreement internally and privately, we think can actually make it a better place. Because we can do those sort of more unique things. And actually, we rendered it as such. If you come up and take a look, it's actually the detail that we added to the street. It almost looks like cobble. It won't be cobblestone, promise. Unless you want, unless you want it. Right, we can take.
Client's going to pass out.
We could. I saw this great stuff in Paris last year. Right, but
Traffic speeds, I would just say.
it does, and actually, it's funny you say that because at the very end here, at the very end in front of the clubhouse, we actually are thinking about raising it, so there's no curb, it's just bollarded. And that's another great sort of traffic calming thing that we do there that really keeps it really pedestrian friendly, and on special occasions, we just block it off, and it's a farmer's market or whatever it is. So we took that feedback to heart, and we're willing to.
Yes. This was the gentleman that liked the bikes.
Yes,
I
yes.
forget his name.
James
Yes,
Wilson.
that
Yes.
is a very good memory.
Yeah, who contacted me twice to come have a tour downtown Newcastle with it, which I will do. Actually, you can see that here in this rendering here, like the little bollards, how we raise that up. So it starts to feel a little bit more like an older sort of downtown type of feel.
And for those of you who don't know, Seth is our planner and designer, so he has he's personally vested in his
Yeah, personally
design.
involved.
And
I'll shut up.
no, it's good. It's good.
Tell me to sit down.
The emotional part of this is very dear. I think he said that guy, I didn't agree with him, but I did it. And,
Right,
it's
no,
all-
well, I didn't agree with the characterization of the parking lot.
Yeah, okay. But no, we want that. We want to be passionate about his design, as we are.
Well, and I just want to add, what Seth just mentioned, being bollarded, outdoor sort of area, community area, not just the community that lives in there, it could be folks coming in from Newcastle too. I know it's not easy, it's not like a quick walk, however, it still can happen.
Well, we love the idea of the connection to Battery Park.
Listen,
We can make that happen.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I can say right now, we're willing to work with the city to make that happen, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think
And I saw that was a comment from Dover State Housing. It looks like, this will be very pedestrian, bicycle friendly within the community,
yes.
but it's kind of hard to connect it to other areas and communities.
I mean, it is the outer
Just something to
limits.
keep in mind,
Yeah,
right?
it is challenging because it is the outer limits of your jurisdiction.
Right.
But there is an opportunity. It's an expensive one. Certainly, it would probably take some state funds to help to connect it ultimately. But what a wonderful addition it would be to Battery Park. And it's
Sean, let me add to that too. We saw this sort of coming because we agree with you. There ought to be, I mean, we want to encourage biking, walking, less driving, especially with gas at $5+ a gallon and rising. We already started building sidewalks in Lucas, along Lucas. We did the warehouse that we're building right now at 90 Lucas. We were not required to put a sidewalk in, but we're putting it in, and actually it's already mostly built. So we're doing it. Yeah, it's not connected. There's nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't end anywhere. However, it's a piece that we've done now with the hopes that we can continue that on. So we're kind of trying to look ahead as much as we can.
And I did see that Delaware State Housing Authority said that they supported the proposal and liked the diverse housing types with some more affordable housing types, but just
We asked if that's the only part of the letter that you're actually cool.
No, they commented during the Plus hearing quite a bit, and they like the mix of housing types, which of course lends itself to various income levels and helps provide diversity in either renters or owners, which is something the Housing Authority often encourages. So yeah, they were some of our biggest fans during the Plus comments.
So it would be a homeowners association then?
Not certain yet. I mean, one thing that we are looking at, or I should say my client is looking at, is keeping everything private, with the exception of the single family detached, and maybe having this fall under, private ownership, where there would be a rental market. Where we'd want to do high-end apartments, certainly, that are, built with good materials and be long-lasting, to appeal to that market. In proximity to the bridge and the interstate, you'd have a lot of folks that would see this as a convenient place to live and get back on the interstate. And actually, from a traffic standpoint, you want to be next to I-95 and major roads, because that's how you reduce traffic through smaller roads, where people would otherwise have to drive through communities to get out to the interstate. At the same time, we do want to be sensitive to affordability. So there's a balance thing we're trying to strike here between a high-end product that the city would welcome, made from good materials, expensive but good, but also providing an affordability component at the same time. But the plan has always been to do higher-end luxury apartments, at least in part, and then have some more affordability components as they be needed.
And just so there's no confusion, at this point in time, the single families are also intended to be rental. So right now, everything you see on there is intended.
Okay.
Okay.
We're setting it up as potential fee simple. Should we want to do that?
But that's what usually happens. They start that way and then after time passes, then they assume all their own problems and the wars begin. So,
From a maintenance standpoint, having it under common ownership housing has
Oh, it
certain
helps a lot.
advantages.
Right.
It helps a lot.
Just
yeah.
There's just some people who will not maintain property. I don't know why they won't in every neighborhood, whether it's single family or towns or twins or what have you. So that is a nice benefit.
But it makes rules so that you can't get people doing things like enclosing their balconies and other crazy nonsense like that. So, sorry if I'm off track.
No, not at all. I think that's exactly the kind of input we need to hear from you on it.
One more thing, as we move forward, and I know this is kind of contradictory to the, making it public and having, public access and dedicated streets. It's a balancing act between that scenario and creating a situation that doesn't put a burden on future boards in the future. I've seen it, a dozen times where everybody has good intentions and things fall through. And next thing you know, there's a couple hundred residences that have private streets, and the HOA is, I know you're not going to have anything, but the management company is not in existence anymore. So one of the things that we're going to be looking closely at is making sure that your institutional arrangements are set up properly, that there will be no burden to any city council in the future for having to take over streets that were never intended to be dedicated, because it happens all the time.
Certainly.
fee simple subdivision roads get dedicated because that's what you do. And it's a no-brainer and the public takes them over. In the apartments, they're always private and that's kind of an easy thing too. But when we get in these in between with retail, especially in a detached situation where they're not fee simple lots, those are getting into the areas where it's sort of out of the normal process for subdivide, dedicate, apartments are private, that's easy. The council can wash their hands of private apartment parking lots because they've never been public. But when we get into these areas like this, where there's a mix of uses, we just want to make sure that the financial arrangements and the management arrangements are set up to protect the city in the future, and there's no expectation of having to take over things in the future. You always say that, and it can always happen no matter what. So that because 400 voters or 400 voters, but that's something that we'll be taking a look at.
That's a valid concern. There's a couple legal mechanisms that we use in Newcastle County in particular to protect against that. One way to protect against it is, and I think if you ask Newcastle County, they've never had to do it, but in all of their maintenance declarations, when you're dealing with open space in particular, not roads, because they typically get dedicated unless they're apartments. There's a provision where the county can actually go in, make repairs, and leave the property. Not ideal, but it's a fail-safe in case you run into a situation where people aren't maintaining, or there's some unanticipated issue that just comes up. But I think if you called Rich Hall or George Haggerty at the county, they would tell you they've never had to do that. But there is, I guess I shouldn't say never as a lawyer, but there are legal mechanisms we can put in place to protect the city.
There was some good news in here for you. On page 14, it says, according to FEMA's National Risk Index,
Slow.
the parcel is considered very low for overall natural hazard risks. Its community resilience is rated as relatively high and social vulnerability is rated as relatively low. So something good happened.
I thought that was a typo at first. I was relieved that there was some.
We want to leave it there.
And on a good note.
I had a question. I see DART, I think DART came up as a question, bus service, and I thought the answer was we didn't think there was bus service. But then I see,
We learned.
I see that there is.
During the Plus hearing, it didn't come up, and then I got a call from the gentleman from DART. And he said, listen, we'd like, you to put in additional stop. They do travel down that road currently.
Oh.
And we said we'd be happy to work with him. And he actually would like to meet with us in the next couple of months in more detail. He was very excited to have an opportunity to expand the bus stop locations there.
Good. More good news.
Yes, another good point. And if you live there and work there, you can walk from Barclay.
Yeah. And if your children went to school,
They could take the bus there.
I just have one more question, and it's an ignorant question because I missed the last presentation and I don't really understand how these things work. But we have a fire department 3 inches away from us. Will they be taking care of you too, or will there be a second fire department installation that will take care of your end of the town?
Where's Jeff Berkshire when you need him?
I think it's a really good question. I'd like to speak to him right now,
Yeah.
actually.
I'll take a shot at it, but I would obviously defer to Jeff. I believe that would fall under your fire department's jurisdiction. Having said that, there are MOUs I know between all the fire.
Highway
companies.
terraces breakdown.
I follow on Facebook, so I know everything that they do. But it's a complex, right? And today their response rate is outstanding. They saved my husband's life this year.
Wow.
So, but that's because they're really near, and that was a consideration when we moved here, was all that stuff. So it's a longer trip away if something goes wrong. If Holloway Terrace is
They're actually
closer.
closer.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to make sure that that's covered. A lot of stuff that's going on in here, I couldn't possibly comment on, but like all the regulations for ecology and all that stuff. I don't have any knowledge, but the fire department. Yes.
That's an excellent question. And as part of the review, and I think it's part of the responsibility of the planning commission, either you make the recommendation or you request the analysis as part of the information that the planning commission can request, is the impact on services. We didn't talk about police, which is obviously a city service, but as part of your review, we can dig into the ability of various services to accommodate this development. And you know, first responders, police. I didn't articulate it tonight, but at some point, I think we will request from, either we will ask for it from the applicant or maybe even from the chief, you know, given the number of people, and I don't know what the criteria is, the types of units or the number of people, but how many additional police officers per 100 people are typically required.
And probably got metrics for that, just like they do
Yes.
for traffic.
Yeah,
Um,
there are. And one of the things that we would always get is the emergency services review of the internal circulation. But in this case, given the comprehensive plan aspect and the rezoning aspect from one type of use to a mixed use residential community, we're going to ask for sort of the universal impact to the service provided. Typically, we say, you know, fire chief, you know, review this for turning radii. Can you get your equipment in here? But I think we're also going to ask, I'm going to suggest that we ask for, you know, what is the capability of serving this development with the facilities and services that we have today? And what impact will it have on those fire, police?
And how does it work with Holloway Terrace and Newcastle? Who responds, or,
There are MOUs, we'll find out.
all right,
We'll find
They're
out.
definitely intertwined
They back up each other and
all the time.
we'll find out with Holloway how they do it with the city. Certainly, we'll also want to show you some offset. There will be certainly certain demands on city services. Internally, my client looked at comparables and what they're paying in taxes. And this is just an estimate. We're double checking the numbers. But our client estimates about just shy of $1 million in annual tax revenue. So certainly we don't expect to put a demand on services and not be paying taxes to offset those. Then you have electric as well. I think this is MSC if I'm not, and as well as water and electric. So we'll be adding that as well. And we'll have more information with the site plan submission. And I think, that would be an appropriate time, I think, to sort of come to some consensus on, Board of Adjustment timing and recommendations, following the submission of the site plan. And I did lay out in my memo, or actually Mike Denote laid out in his memo, a timeline of how that could work. So we'll work with your planner and your city solicitor once we get to the site plan level. So you're not panicking that we're expecting anything in terms of recommendation in the next couple of months. I think probably towards the end of the summer is probably when we would hope we could get some recommendation from you on various points that Mr. Rogers raised. But as part of our site plan, we'll propose a schedule, hopefully in harmony one way or another with staff and your solicitor. We did waive any deadlines, so we didn't have folks rushing or being concerned about fully vetting this project.
yes, Matthew.
This is a general question, and this can all of the naive statements, but what is the line that we, as are recommending project versus whether or not people want to live there, taking into account all these factors. So, for example, you mentioned about how the proximity to the fire station was something to look into. what if somebody don't care about, I mean, obviously, the city serves this, there's responsibility, but, I mean, there's other factors like that too as well, it's like, well, traffic doesn't bother me, that's not sure, I don't mean, so, I mean, I think we're looking at a lot of things that, I guess I just need to know for myself, are we worried about the marketing aspect of it?
That's why I asked the flood insurance question.
Yeah.
Because if somebody told me you were moving it somewhere and you had to buy flood insurance, I'd say, whoa, 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 whoa.
Well, what I'm saying is, I guess what I'm asking is it our responsibility to take on the role of the potential buyer? Or is it more so, let's make sure about the environmental concerns, the concerns on the bigger picture? But I'm just curious about the gray area as to, well, if I want to live there, I want to know about this. I mean, I think there's going to be different people are going to react different ways. So it's just, I guess I just need clarification on that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and it's certainly a fair question. I'll defer to the city solicitor as your counsel. I will tell you, as former assistant county attorney, advising boards, what I would say, and I believe your solicitor will probably say the same, but again, I defer to him, is that your role is typically limited to code compliance. Does the project comply with your code or not? Does it comply with state code or not? Does it comply with the comp plan? And are there things, as Mr. Rogers mentioned earlier, that you'd want to ask for them to exceed code because you think they're appropriate under the circumstances, whether it be future flooding forecasting, sea level. But I don't believe, and again, defer Dan Loss, Mr. Losco, that marketability issues are typically weighed as zoning factors. And that doesn't mean that subconsciously you may not be thinking about that. But that's, you're all human beings. I think, in thinking through this location myself, I'll just share this with you. I think everybody makes a decision where they want to live and rent. And you have folks that, can see the, and I'm not comparing the HI area here to, what is it, Salem Creek or Hope Creek nuclear power plant on the Delaware River, but there are many people who choose to live around nuclear power plant. They can see it from their backyards south of the canal. There's folks up and down Route 9 that live close to the refinery. I think those are personal choices that people make freely, and you certainly can't drive into this area without seeing that there are certain industrial components, there's certain warehousing components, there's certain plant components, and they can make their own choice. But it's not something that's normally addressed in the zoning code, and I don't believe it's addressed in yours. We have a charter school elected to locate there, and is doing well, and they're excited about this project. And for those of you who weren't able to make the last meeting, they've written a letter of support for the project. They see this as a positive for them. And if you think about it, you could have some children that'll live there and go to school there and be able to walk there and not drive a car. The parents don't have to get up in the morning and drive a car or take the school bus. So there's some real benefits to adding a mix of uses in the area. Folks, so I don't mean to be repetitive because I know I talked a little bit about this the last meeting, but for folks who, again, couldn't make that, one of the points we put out on the floor was, think of the folks who drive out of the park today to go get lunch. They'll actually have a place if they want to stop internally that they can walk to, have lunch, maybe buy some things in the commercial component, maybe go to the clubhouse and eat a meal in addition to the commercial that would be mixed out towards the frontage of the road. And that's a traffic reducer or helps reduce trips. And if you wanted to live and work there, that would really be the best of both worlds. If you already live in the area, you could live and walk to work. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to do that, but the mix of use does provide that opportunity to folks who want to live and eat where they work. Just something that went into our thought process when we were thinking through this. And then you see the views of the bridge and the river, and they're stunning. And this is the last large parcel in that park. And if it goes warehousing, that opportunity will be lost, at least for our lifetimes. Maybe the next generation will, when warehousing isn't as popular, if it ever dies out. But what incredible views of the bridge. And these renderings were actually done in context. So the bridge profile you see there and that view shed, Seth was involved, and that is accurate.
It's accurate. We can now geolocate pretty much anything, so.
All right, are there other comments, questions? Yes.
I have a quick question. For the commercial component,
Yes.
is it more geared to families? Like what ideas?
Sure. So just to show you where they are located in case.
Okay.
Okay, good. So, this plan, what I'm doing.
So, so the commercial components, there's the ground floor of these two buildings, which are, by the way, these buildings here. Up along Lukens, we have a little bit of like shop retail. That's what Sean was mentioning, like a sandwich shop or a coffee shop or something like that. So that's what's there. And then down here is a clubhouse, which is an amenity for the entire community. But we also have a restaurant attached to it, which will be open to anybody. So those are the commercial components.
So the idea is to service certainly folks who live there, but also to pull in some folks who may work there. Because a lot of it, the reason you want to generally put retail towards the front is you're more likely to get a high-end user there because they see their market not just being limited to the people living there, but people who will see them when they drive by on the road. And tenants like that, most brokers will tell you that that's very important. You won't get a regional or national tenant way back in a community, but you might get one close to the road because they see the foot traffic and the vehicular traffic that they can pull in. They don't tend to bring trips in, but they do tend to feed off of trips that are already going by.
And they're relatively small. Each of those spaces in the building is just 6,000 feet.
Okay.
So it's not, we're not talking about huge, big boxes or anything like that.
Seth, I'm sorry, I missed you said clubhouse and a restaurant. You said something after the restaurant. I mean, a commercial restaurant.
No, it's probably, yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
And just one, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
Just
go
say one
ahead.
last point. We want to be successful too, from a marketing standpoint. We really want this to sell. So we're on the same page with you, even if it's subconscious.
I just wanted, I don't think we're responsible for it. So,
I agree.
so I think there's just an area that we need to, well, some people may not like it, some people may not. And we may be wrong in some areas that we think they may not like, that they may. So I just think that,
Understood.
I try to understand it myself too, because I think it can go overlap really easy.
As far as, looking at the sustainable practices information, and we've had comment, we had a comment from somebody regarding climate change. What type of study are you doing as far as the carbon footprint this type of community would add to? Because this recommended, geothermal, looking into that, looking into solar panels, adding electric car chargers, which we are already doing within the city. So a lot of people are concerned, especially in a coastline area, about adding to the carbon footprint. Is there going to be any information or study or, and I know some of this is very pricey, geothermal is very expensive, but it's noted here that, Delmarva could give grants for solar panels and what have you.
All fair questions, certainly. Again, we got this Friday, and we really need to spend a good week digesting it, but we will certainly look. I think hydrothermal is certainly something we can look at, see if it's viable for this location. Solar panels, certainly we can look at car charging. I think we talked a little bit about that last time. That may have been your idea, and we were certainly open to that. I think, that in terms of the carbon footprint issue, I mean, there are areas, in our county that are zoned for development. There's areas that aren't. And, the level 1, level 2 designation is for areas that are really being designated for infrastructure and growth. So, if we were coming to you asking to change this from, like a farmland zoning to an industrial, I think we have a much taller hill to climb. But we are dealing with a site that's already zoned for industrial use. And quite frankly, I would almost describe this as a model down zoning from that. And potentially would have less of a carbon footprint than something we probably could do in the industrial zoning if we really studied it. So we are focused on that issue. We do want to provide certainly some contribution, but we just haven't had quite enough time to come up with a proposal.
The other concern, I think, is also the stress on the grids, and I believe in the county council meeting, they shut down the plant or something, and the rates went up.
The city council or county? council?
City council
Okay.
meeting.
City council.
Okay.
Yes. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but I know that the wholesale rate went up by 6%, so our rates will go up by 2% and things like that. And I just feel like the more, and we do, according to the information that was given, have the second lowest electric in the area. So being part of that co-op, I think the more that we pull from it, the harder it's going to be to maintain our rates as well.
That's a good question. In my experience, it's, maybe these are odd times, but in my experience, it's usually the opposite. The volume usually helps, but I'll contact MSC about that. Yeah, interesting question.
Indian River was going to shut down. And DMAC convinced the feds to let them stay open, but they are allowed to charge appropriately.
Oh, interesting.
Wholesale, obviously, MSC buys wholesale, so the wholesale rates are going up.
Interesting. So that might not have to do necessarily with extra demand. It's just they're able to charge more, or we don't know.
Don't know why the Indian River plant was going to shut down. I'm not sure. Antiquated, it was having a hard time making its way. Making enough money to keep it operating.
There wasn't much notice given on that.
Right.
From what we heard.
Every time I think of that facility, I don't know if anybody's been on the river by there on a boat, but the mounds of coal that are right along the Indian River, right next to that plant, you can boat right by it. Mountains of coal have piled up that just leaches into that waterway. Anyway, I'll check in with NSC and see if we can find out if more users created an adverse.
Well,
impact.
obviously, the possibility of losing that site is it's going to be an issue, and that's not a permanent fix.
Yeah, I think it's out of the hands of the applicant. It's the coal-fired plant can't keep up with the environmental regulations. It's too
I see.
expensive to operate. And they wanted to shut it down, but due to the impacts of this is just from the city council presentation by MSC, due to the impacts, the co-op convinced the regulatory agencies to let them to keep it open. But I think they're doing so grudgingly and getting their costs
Adjusted accordingly.
accordingly.
And so the real question is, what would happen, I guess, if they didn't continue to operate? What impact would that have on the city? I would have to think MSC is all over that. And I'll certainly inquire if you'd like.
Good question.
Anything else? All right, I mean, we all just got this on Friday,
we
so
did.
there's a lot of good discussion based on that fact. And I mean, it was helpful in our decision-making to see some of the comments, and appreciate you all coming to help us understand our path forward. I know you were recommending a workshop, Chris. I'm not sure timing on that.
Yes, we'll have to get together.
Maybe a call this week to talk a
Yes,
little bit about
we'll have to
that.
Get together as staff and with you and, see what resources are available and lay out, the next steps for review. Obviously, any workshop will be, open to the public. And
Right.
we'll just have to make sure that it's scheduled appropriately. We could have talked about any one of these things for an hour.
Yes, agreed.
Contract zoning, emergency services, HOAs, not HOAs, all of those things we could talk about for hours. So it's hard to, get the plus comments and a new concept, relatively new concept for the city. So there's a lot going on there. So I think a workshop would be good. We just have to structure it properly, have to get our ducks in order. I would like to first get with the applicant and the city solicitor and understand and lay out the process better, understanding and be able to explain to you, what your roles are at various levels. Comprehensive plan, zoning, special exception, PUD, or plan development. So there's a lot of land use mechanisms going on here that we have to all put the puzzles together and lay out a path forward for you and the applicant.
Sounds good.
And we'll certainly be preparing a written response to the plus comments,
Yes.
which we're required to do under state law. And we'll be working on them over the next couple of weeks. So our plan would be certainly to have those written responses back to us and copy to you.
All right.
And that'll give us more time, obviously, to think through them this week and what we can offer up as a proposed mechanism to address some of the sustainability issues and maybe some of the level rise issues. Also, there will almost certainly be an updated letter that's going to come out because of the DEMA comment being, more of a recommendation and not something that is required by
Required.
code. So again, it was just maybe just an oversight, but it got my attention.
What a way to go into the weekend.
I'm actually happy to see Chris chatted.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we recommend you don't develop
We
any
all
site
flinched that.
adjacent to a floodplain.
I didn't flinch, my head exploded.
But thank you all for your
All
time.
right, well,
too.
thank you for
Thank you.
coming. It was very helpful.
Now your whole meeting's gone.
Oh.
All the others.
We need a spelling of your last name over here for this young lady.
G.
Next
A N.
All right. Now we will move on to our next. You can't be. Yes, there is.
That's what I thought.
Thank you. All right, in your packet, review of the comprehensive plan annual report. And we spent most of a planning commission meeting going through all of the goals and giving feedback. And I know Chris and Ryan from AECom spent some time also looking at ordinances and things that have been passed by city council and put together the what will be submitted to state planning, or has it been submitted? Wait,
No, it has not.
all right,
So I wanted to get your blessing
all right.
and then it gets forwarded to the mayor for his signature and it gets passed on to state planning.
All right, so this is our annual update to our comprehensive plan. I looked through it and we had minutes from our discussion and I thought it was fairly accurate, or it was accurate based on what we had discussed. And it looked like Chris and Ryan had done some more research in pulling out some of the other studies. There was one I wasn't aware of, Chris, and I'm on a sea level rise task force for the city. It's under the G12, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first dot, I'm working with the partnership for the Delaware Estuary, a grant through the Delaware Coastal Program. I just wasn't aware of that. But that's great if we got that.
Yeah, that's something that Ryan and Dave Afey,
Uh-huh.
the city engineer,
That's fairly recent.
I didn't talk to them specifically about that. I talked to them about the work that's ongoing right now regarding determining what
The elevations,
the building, what buildings would be impacted
Right.
at certain sea level rise scenarios. We're actually looking at the topography and first floors of different buildings and mapping out which buildings would be impacted given the different sea level rise scenarios and those that are important, like emergency services and others. Sorry, I don't know the details of that first bullet regarding.
that's I mean, that's wonderful that we got that grant. I just wasn't aware of it, and Dave usually attends our meetings, but he was ill. So maybe it's something that's fairly recent. And I can follow up with them. So I don't have any comments. Does anyone have any updates or comments or suggestions? All right, do you need a motion or can we?
I would
Alright.
just, make a motion to accept it and forward it to the mayor for his consideration.
Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
All right,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you for
Yeah.
putting this together.
Ryan.
But it is helpful to see it on paper. That we have made a lot of movement in the last.
sure.
I don't want to take up too much more time, but we talked about this, Chairman, is earlier in the budgetary process, and, this is just stating what has been done. The intent also of an annual report is to, and the comprehensive plan, looking at it annually, is to be proactive. And that takes money, and you may want to have recommendations or discussions with the city administrator to determine at what point in the budget process, which is a long time ago, do you need to go to ask for funding to do things that you think are priorities that are in the comp plan. So this is just reflective
Correct.
of stuff
Yeah.
that's done. But you can also be more proactive, not that, there's no guarantee that you'll get the money or the city council, has the money to do it, but that's your role is to look at the comp plan and say, boy, we haven't done this, and this keeps coming up, and we think we ought to take action on this, and city council can we look into this, and here's how much it costs, that kind of stuff. That's not a sales job, but that's your
I did talk to
role.
Bill Garthel
Okay.
about having a workshop to precede the budget workshop for the next fiscal year. And I know we talked about it at one of our meetings, doing it in February, and then someone suggested before even before the end of the year, but definitely before the city budget process gets underway.
Yeah, I think I suggested before the holidays because then just a lot starts happening all at once.
Yes. I mean, it doesn't take effect until July 1st, so we still have time.
So I guess my thought process is, we come up with a plan, then we gotta find, how much is that gonna cost to do the research? Nobody's gonna do all that during the holidays.
Right.
With families and what have you.
All right, but well, as we get into fall, we should talk about timing and reach out to the city and see if we can't schedule something. And I actually asked for additional money for AECom to be put in the budget to help with that, as well as some other things. All right, transportation, yes, transportation plan, Wilmapco transportation plan. Some progress. So first of all, the Delaware chapter of the American Planning Association came to Newcastle for a tour and discussion of our transportation plan. And then they had a social afterwards at Mercury Cafe.
Perfection.
And Russ Smith from City Council and I participated with the group. And we did a little walking tour. We met in front of Mercury. We walked down to the river and talked about some of the flooding issues. And transportation wise, we talked about some of the transportation issues that are in the plan. Oh, also the consultants were from Century Engineering, a couple of them came. And then we walked all the way up to Delaware Street and talked about some of the intersections that are in the plan. So it was nice discussion, and it brought in some people from other parts of the state.
From Heather?
Yes. I am on the Public Advisory Committee for Wilmapco. Our draft plan was presented to the Public Advisory Committee in May by Heather. And after that, I received an electronic version of the report. Did you receive it?
I did not, no.
All right,
You can forward it.
all right, I will forward it to
Yeah,
you.
'cause I haven't heard anything.
All right. And I honestly have not had a chance to look at it with all the other things we have going on. But I will, and so the next steps are to either have another advisory committee meeting, or they're just gonna receive feedback. So that's why I wasn't sure if it went out to all the advisory committee. All right, I'll make sure you get it. And then there will be a council review of the report. But they, it's similar to some of the presentations that have been made over the last year or so, addressing major intersections and bike and ped, and it has a lot of good recommendations. Sea level rise task force, we talked a little bit about that. We've been meeting monthly. We are using reports and studies that are mentioned in your comp plan update and building on those. And we know the current elevation studies are underway, and we're supposed to get data sometime this summer, and they will be fed into models to we're trying to look at 3 or 4, maybe more major areas. One, the gap between the dikes, which is our city, or the main part of our city, at least the historic district, raising the dikes, and to what level, the alternatives for raising the dikes. FEMA has increased their floodplain level to 9 feet, and our dikes are 8.5 feet. And, so should the dikes be raised to 9 feet? Should we look ahead to sea level rise and try to raise them to 10.5 feet? Or, as some of the information in the plus report said, should we try to raise them to 13 feet? And what are the cost benefits? How many additional structures would benefit, looking ahead in time in each of those scenarios, and there's models to try to figure all that out. But also flooding in other parts of the city based on sea level rise, not stormwater management, but sea level rise, and then some flood proofing measures that individual property owners can make to help. But it'll also impact our code. I mean, I think at some point we will recommend that our code be looked at to maybe have higher standards than what's currently in our code to address projected sea level rise. That Sean Tucker was talking about, what the code now says, you only have to do this, but maybe the code should be adjusted.
Do we know how far back the code is based on, like, any adjustments made to that?
I don't know how old the code is, but I do know that your code has to meet a certain level in order for your community to be rated a certain way, in order for the homeowners to get insurance at a certain discounted rate.
Okay.
So there's always that, I won't say political, I mean, you have to keep your code up to date or people's insurance rates are going to suffer. So I'm not an expert in floodplain or community rating systems is what that's called, but it's not antiquated. I should put it that way.
Are there grants or funds available for residents to help mitigate?
That's another component of what this task force is tasked with, is to research grants and potential funding sources. So I know, we divided up some of the possible agencies and are looking into that. Don't have
But
the
they would be
answers now.
available to residents
Mhm.
specifically. And there's some nice houses on the Strand, but
Now,
I look at
gotta
them
stop jumping
online
the
and then I
strand.
say, I don't have any flood insurance. I'm good.
Yeah.
But, I mean, typically, I mean, grants are given to communities to address it as a whole, because your rating system is based on your community's ability, and insurance isn't like, I guess you could do your own improvements, and I don't. I should
Somebody did on the Strand, built a whole berm out there, and I think a lot of people on the Strand got upset about it. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. I mean, the ultimate of the one person doing their thing, spending all the money, was that it actually imperiled other people's houses. So, you know, you have to kind of
That
not
didn't
let
have to
people,
go through some type of approval
It
process.
did, it did.
I think it was unintended consequences, based on what I've heard. I've only heard anecdotally, but that at the end of that berm, other people's homes became more vulnerable. That's what I heard.
I'm not sure. Yeah, so to go back, individual homeowners, I mean,
Well, because I thought you said that they were gonna make recommendations for what homeowners can do to their homes to help mitigate this, and you make recommendations, but if it's gonna cost them money.
I
you
mean,
know,
I think
you're not gonna
it's
give them a
possible,
resource or
um,
something to
based on,
assist with that.
right, it's possible. And we're trying to look into the funding sources right now.
Oh, you mean the homes that are being identified as being the most vulnerable? Oh, I
Yes.
see. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that. But we can find out.
That may be something like if we get a grant, like the city gets a grant, then the homeowners could apply for assistance.
I
through
would
the
think
city, like,
especially.
once they get the grant or something. So, I mean, I think there's still some way to potentially spin it so that individual homeowners that are affected can get assistance, but it might not necessarily be directly with a grant or something themselves. It would be through the city getting a grant.
I think especially with, you know, the age of the houses and what have you there, you know, there's a need to preserve them. And so as being in the historic district, you would want that to be a priority, because that's, you know, the draw to the city.
I think there's certainly tax incentives for restoring historic homes and stuff like that. But we'll find out.
My understanding is a lot of these tax incentives they give you, like for your windows and doing all these upgrades, are really negligible in the end. And they're one time, once you've exceeded a certain amount and you replaced windows or you've done something else, if you do something else, you have exceeded the funds you can get for these, you know, Energy Star things and replacing your windows. It's what I was advised recently through my accountant. He said, you know, you get like so much for the lifetime of that home ownership, and then that's it. So that would be my concern. You know, if they've done improvements and they've exceeded some type of set funding amount already, you know, what type of, like, can we reach out to some type of historical preservation? You know, where they want to preserve historical homes so that, you know, they're not refurbishing them, they're staying in good shape to begin with, type of thing. And a lot of those houses on the Strand would meet that requirement.
So more, I would say more to come.
Yeah,
We're just
there's a whole-
beginning the process of researching what kinds of grants that the city could apply for.
That's another, you can spend a workshop on historic preservation in floodplain. For example, if you make improvements to your house and it's in the floodplain and it increases the value by more than 50%, you have to meet the floodplain requirements for the entire house, even the existing part. But there's an exemption for historic preservation in some situations, because that takes a higher, because it costs more money to preserve historic homes. So there's some waivers of that sort of floodplain provision for historic structures. So there's very complex regulations and incentives. But a lot of that information will probably come out in some of the sea level rise studies that are coming, especially as they relate to the individual structures that are being identified.
All right, comment, oh, I took electric chargers off the special projects, George. I mean, if you have something to add, please jump in, but, all right. I thought we were kind of in a holding pattern, so.
Pretty much, and like you said, all the ones for level 2 are pretty much placed around the city, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so they had in that massage, I'm missing.
All right. Comments from commission members. I just wanted to start off. I had sent an email to all the commissioners, except for Tamara, she's new, asking about dates with summer vacations. And I just have a recommendation. I'm not able to be at either the scheduled fourth Monday in July or August. But my recommendation, just from everybody's feedback, is that the commission meet on the regularly assigned July 25th, Monday, July 25th, fourth Monday. And Bree is our new vice chair, have her run the meeting, and we can work on the agenda together. You know, we'll see what happens, Chris, with a workshop, or, you know, we'll have to figure out timing with that. And then the August meeting, I would like to move to the fifth Monday, which is Monday, August 29th. And I think Matthew was the only one who said, well, maybe I won't be here, but I can be here that Monday, if that's all right with everyone. I'll just ask him to move it. All right.
Yeah.
And I didn't ask you, Chris, for your schedule.
Yeah, I forget it already.
Oh, all right.
My wife told me my vacation a few times, and I'm embarrassed.
All right, well, we'll just plan on that. So regular Monday, July 25th for the July meeting, and August meeting moved to the fifth Monday, which is August 29th. Other comments from commission members? Anything anyone would like to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah, me just briefly, we went to the opening of the trustees' new headquarters in the farmhouse, which is wonderful. And we'd never been in the barn before, and that was incredibly awesome also. It was a great event, and it's really worth going to check it out. I think they did a really nice job. But the thing that impressed me the most, and I kept thinking, what could we do with it, is their meeting room, which is gorgeous. You haven't seen it. It is gorgeous. And I mean, they came in here and they said, can we use that thing up there? Well, they have this giant, fully wired room where you can have AV and sound and everything. In fact, they had a movie playing of the reconstruction of the place. So I wouldn't be so bold as to suggest that we should go meet there, but I might. But the thing that really got me that I think would help us was they had the names of all of the trustees at their seats. And I sort of had like name plaque envy. And I thought if we all had name plaques it's just one more thing for the team to bring in for us. But you know, these people here are looking at us where they have no idea who we are. And they may see our names. I mean, I write stuff in the weekly and stuff, then they would say, oh, that person, you know. I just think it would help if either we have a badge on or we have some little plaque that sits in front of us for these meetings. So people
Council
know
has
who we
plaques.
are. Pardon?
Council has plaques too.
Yeah, well, so. we
I
have
wouldn't
plaques.
mind moving to another location because parking is not very
It's
friendly
not
here.
so near. Well, the trustees' space is available a lot of the time, obviously, because they're only meeting, you know, once a month or twice a month or whatever. They may have their committee meetings or what have you, but I don't know what the sense of the group is, but gosh, it's beautiful. It's really
It
beautiful.
is beautiful. I went to the open house as well. They did a great job.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a kind of a separation between city trustees, or if it is fine if we met there. I can certainly follow up with.
It's just a place.
I know, it's just a meeting room.
And, you know, we don't generally get huge numbers of people coming here. We might get more coming out there. It's big enough that people could sit around the edges if they wanted to. It's a huge, you know, table in the middle. It's beautiful. But the great thing is the whole AV and the setup is just gorgeous. So
Oh, yeah. So I'm actually on vacation now, but I was in Alabama yesterday. I came back and I'm flying out to Orlando tomorrow. So I was like, okay, I can't miss my first meeting. My question is, if we went to a place like that, would there be a virtual option? Just say if I was not here and I couldn't make it back in this one little moment in time, like, would I be able to connect virtually so I won't miss?
So I did ask that question. And at the time that I asked the question a couple months ago, it was not available for the commission and community meetings. Council does have a virtual aspect that people can listen in. They can't participate or vote, but the public can listen in. So I can ask again.
And I don't know.
Use the trustees place, they think they have that, just
Yeah.
saying.
So, and I know like, so I run the board meetings for the issue. And so I know that we provide like a hybrid option. And so I didn't know if there's like a fine line. So if like two of us were here virtually, like, could it just be for our planning commission? Or it could also be for the planning commission and the public as well. Like, I guess it depends on like how we can do it. But it doesn't have to be like for everyone. It could just be for us to kind of like meet, so that we would be able to, but if we're on virtual, then maybe we do lose our privilege for voting. I'm not sure how that works, but I know like with our board, they don't lose their privilege, but so those are just little things to consider as well. I was just curious.
Well, I mean, the city's really controlling those kinds of decisions. I can ask again. Because I think that for all the groups that are meeting here, which are all the commissions, committees, except for council, we're meeting here and we meet in person right now. I'll ask again.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, when you meet, it's in public. So you have to make it available.
To the public as well. Okay, that's what I wanted.
Just one distinction, like if we're just talking about a workshop, and if it's advertised as a workshop, that would be something that it would still be open to the public. The chair could decide to take public comment or not, because it's a workshop, and you would not be able to vote. But it has nothing to do with being hybrid or anything. But,
Okay.
so those are the types of distinctions about voting and not voting.
Okay.
But when you meet, it's in public, and I don't know, should avoid, a quorum getting together, and chatting about stuff outside of a meeting, the information that.
Yeah, like even when you send emails, like we can't send like certain emails. It can't be like everybody on that email. Like sometimes you have to break it up because if people are giving feedback and we're making a decision via email, then that can really be construed. Okay, you guys have established a meeting here.
Yeah, I would defer to council on that, but
Yeah.
that's stuff.
Mhm.
But all of your
That
meetings
makes
are public.
Thank you.
Will we get updated contact lists since the members have changed so much since I started?
You're rich now.
I know. Yes, Kim usually provides that.
I was looking at that, it's
I
like,
know.
there's a lot of X's on there.
I know. It does keep changing.
I think I'm like.
But yes, Kim,
7 months in, the third largest tenure.
you
so
may
far.
have it, Matthew.
I think you have me by 1 month.
Yes, we will. So I will check with Kim tomorrow. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Comments?
Yeah.
There's a public comment.
Oh, that's right, sorry. Thank you.
Read this or do you want to read it?
I have it.
Okay.
Did you all receive from the Honeybee Kitchen?
Yes.
All right. read it. Hello, I planned on attending the meeting tonight, but I'm under the weather, so wanted to submit a comment, please. Thank you to this commission for your service to our city as a mother, urban farmer, small business owner, and effective and sought after climate and biological diversity organizer. I want to make sure that the efforts of this commission are keeping our climate and ecological emergency in mind with every decision made. Our own president has said we are in a code red situation, and research by Denrex says that 70% of Delawareans think we should take immediate action to reduce the impact of our climate crisis, and a link to a Denrex website. Growing our food is sure to be a top priority in the coming years, so trying to locate the best areas around Newcastle to preserve for crop farming and food forests would be in the best interest of our residents. Creating a true walk bikeable city is top priority, with all resident needs being met within close proximity is key. Supporting farms and farmers using regenerative agriculture, including small livestock farms that do not rely on outsourced amendments for production would be wise. Encouraging entrepreneurship by those who wish to provide basic needs is visionary, i.e. food canning, preservation, small manufacturing of common necessities, appliance repair. Affordable housing is of course a necessity, but only in areas already developed. No uncovered land should be developed ever again, and any land that can be rewilded should be. Supply chain disruption is happening all over the world, and a person starves to death every 48 seconds in West Africa. Link to Oxfam website. We must be forward-thinking, self-reliant, and resilient. We are in this affluent town situated on the river with land at our disposal, have a unique opportunity to adhere to the 7 generations rule of thinking in all we do. Let's please not squander this opportunity. Sincerely and with great concern, Karen Igu on Cherry Street.
Here, here.
A lot of passion and good things to keep in mind. All right. Any other comments on that? Motion to adjourn? Motion. Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.